Welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. It's time for our regular dive into the news, and I'm varying my intro this week simply because somebody pointed out I always start this podcast in exactly the same way. Now I haven't. But this is Phil Topham, Executive Director of the FIEC, and with me is our National Director, John Stevens. Hello, John.
Hi, Phil.
And our Head of National Ministries, Adrian Reynolds. Hello, Adrian.
We're going to change our names.
No, I'm not going to do anything. I just thought I'd vary it slightly just for this dear brother. That's as exciting as it gets.
Adrian's bringing the variety with his hat.
Yeah, absolutely. He looks fantastic. It's not the Philadelphia Eagles hat this week, Adrian.
No, I've gone for a European.
Gone for a brand.
I've gone for a European brand.
Very good. Very good. Well, brothers, it's good to see you. We're going to get onto some of the stories that people have been talking about in the news this past couple of weeks. Before we do, a couple of bits of news from us. The first one is our Leaders Conference coming up this November, 10th to the 12th of November in Blackpool. Bookings opened yesterday, I think, or the day before.
They did. Yeah, I'm really excited about this, Phil. It's on the theme of mission. Understood quite broadly, because actually we want to reach the nations wherever they are, and very often they're just around the corner, as well as the other side of the world. We want to include all of that. I think it's a really important topic for all kinds of church leaders. And to be honest, it's one that we often delegate away to other people. You know, there's someone keen in the church or enthusiastic that looks after mission for us. So it's not that churches aren't thinking about mission. We need to rejoice in all that churches are doing. But trying to think how does a right view of mission kind of weave its way through to the whole ethos of the church, the nature of the church. So it's a really important topic, and I'm really excited about it. A bit more space in the programme this year to tell stories. So it's not just come to a conference and be told all the things you're not doing. It's come to a conference and hear how, to use that verse from Colossians, all around the world, the gospel is growing and bearing fruit.
Mm-hmm. And the nations are coming to us, aren't they? That's going to be a part of what we'll be thinking
at the conference.
Yeah, well, quite.
Well, some of them are.
Yeah. Fantastic. We're looking forward to that. So bookings open now. £245 if you buy your ticket before the 7th of July, and you will need to book your own accommodation. So we're really looking forward to Church Without Borders, our Leaders Conference in November. And we've also announced another conference this past week. John, tell us a bit about Rising Lights.
We're really excited by Rising Lights, this new FIEC initiative, which is going to be a conference or an event for kind of church members, Christians in Torquay, between the 6th and 10th of April 2026. Many of us have benefited immensely from Word Alive over the years. I've been involved in leading it and organising it, and many of our churches have come to it. It was great to have an Easter event. It was wonderfully encouraging to be with other believers, massively helpful for our families and our children and our kids with the kids' work that were there. And there's just something special about being together with thousands of Christians, hearing the word and encouraging one another. And very sadly, Word Alive had to close. The venue was shut down. It was just impossible for that to continue in quite the same way. And the consequence of that is that there's not been something in Easter. So lots of people used to come regularly in Easter, and there's a gap there. And so we felt as FIEC we ought to step in to put something on, an event for people at that time. So Rising Light, it's going to be a full programme, Bible readings. Paul Mallard's going to be speaking from Philippians, seminars, kids' work, sort of seminars with a whole variety of areas of life being addressed. So in Torquay, I think the key difference from Word Alive is going to be that people will find their own accommodation. So in that sense, it's going to operate a little bit more like Keswick in the way that you have to find your own accommodation and come. But there's loads of accommodation at all different price points available in Torquay and the area. So we've announced the dates. Bookings aren't opening yet. They're coming later. That's coming later in April. We're really excited by this, and dates are coming together.
And just so you know, if you're listening as a church leader, we're putting a short film together you can show in your churches. We've got programmes, brochures that will be coming out to all churches over the Easter break this year. Bookings will open by the end of April, and it's going to be £160 for adults, £40 for kids, and then you book your own accommodation.
And if you're listening to this and you're not in an FIEC church, you're very welcome. It's not just for people in FIEC churches. I guess that's the key difference to the Caster. So Patheli conference we had that was really focused in on FIEC churches. We want to serve people in FIEC churches really well. We also want to be generous, so we'd love to see as many Bible-believing evangelicals there as possible.
Organised by us, but not just for us. That's what we're
exactly
saying, isn't it? Excellent. So we're really excited for Rising Lights. We've asked you to save the date, so please do. 6th to the 10th of April 2026. Brilliant. That brings us up to date with FIEC, I think. Let's talk about some of the news stories that have hit the headlines this past couple of weeks.
Where to start?
Let's go to the States is where we're going to start. It's an extraordinary story coming out of the White House.
If you stop there, many extraordinary stories.
Very good.
Yes.
But it's an extraordinary story of a journalist being added to a Signal messaging group. It's a bit like WhatsApp. It's not. It's different to WhatsApp. But a journalist added to a Signal messaging group with high-level officials from the Trump administration, seemingly talking about strikes in Yemen, where they were going to strike, what dates they were going to strike, all this kind of stuff. Talk about that being classified information, which the White House has denied. But just this extraordinary kind of candid conversation that we read here. And it just beggars belief, frankly. What do we make of this?
Goodness, where to start? The journalist's name, by the way, is Jeffrey Goldberg, works for The Atlantic.
Yeah, The Atlantic, yeah.
I mean, there are several levels to this. We shouldn't forget, by the way, that this is how a lot of business in government is conducted. We've seen that through the COVID inquiry.
Yeah, we did see the WhatsApp messages in government
WhatsApp
here.
messaging. That if you want an immediate response, I mean, it does slightly surprise me that the US government doesn't have its own internal messaging secure system. But notwithstanding that, I think you do need to have these discussions, obviously, in government about important questions, who to strike, where to strike, should we strike, all those kinds of discussions that are going on. But it does seem almost beyond belief that a journalist was included in that.
Added by accident, it seems.
Added by accident. Yeah. And they've now turned on him. So Trump just this week tweeted that the journalist was a sleaze bag and a loser.
There we are.
So he's not particularly popular. But I think it is a reminder that you do need to have confidential discussions. You do need to have discussions about life, about the business of government in this case, or if we're talking about church leadership, about the business of church leadership. But you do have to be careful with those. I mean, I'm just thinking, we have an elders WhatsApp group in our church. How easy it would be to post on the wrong WhatsApp group, something that was confidential. So I think, this just seems to be ineptitude, but I think, just in terms of oversight, we can also make lots of mistakes when it comes to messaging as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Candid conversations, though, John, reveal what people really think?
Well, I think that's exactly right. So you've got this element of confidentiality and things being revealed. Unfortunately, we have all probably sent the danger of sending an email to somebody to the wrong person and you give something away. So there's a real warning about the danger of confidentiality and making sure you observe that. But I think here what's more interesting is the revelation of what people really think. That it's not just that it's confidential information, but here are people speaking entirely openly about what they think about the world. And actually, from a European perspective, what they actually think about ours. Yeah. And I think that the shocking way that J.D. Vance has spoken about Europe, describing Europe as being pathetic, his verdicts about the kind of the Houthis and saying that's a European problem, the transactional nature of the states, and the Suez Canal only benefits Europe. I mean, all of that is just simply not true. So much of what's going on in the Middle East is the result of American foreign policy decisions over decades. Why is this Islamic terrorism there? Well, it's back to the Americans arming people in Afghanistan, bringing IS into existence, support the bin Ladens, what happens in Iraq and elsewhere. So the idea that somehow this is a European problem and global trade through Suez is of benefit to the entire world. It's not just about Europe benefiting, it's about America benefiting as well because of all of the interconnected trade relationships. So at one level, it's just sort of shocking to see those views being expressed. But it does show what they think about us. It shows the world has changed.
And not just expressed, not then critiqued.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely. No one's saying, no, that's not right.
But I think the point you're making there is absolutely right, is here the heart, in a sense, is being revealed. And people can live giving a sort of a public persona of what they think, but here suddenly you get an insight into what's really going on. And at one level, we need to recognise we're all in danger of that. And the Bible warns us against it. It warns us about what's in our hearts that becomes our words. It warns us against hypocrisy and putting on a mask that says something different publicly from privately. And it says that all words in the end will be brought into judgment. Yeah. And I think we need to bear that in mind. So we were talking about elders meetings. Think about any meeting with another person, an elders, a church, and how you talk about others. It would be very easy to have views and attitudes about other people that are not what you're publicly communicating. Would you really like your church to hear all that you said about the people in your church or others? I think we just need to guard ourselves in terms of thinking through what we not just say, but then what we really think, which is behind that. So I think there's a real warning here to us about what it means to have genuine integrity. and to behave with integrity.
How do we, in the midst of that, John, how do we protect confidentiality? So I'm just reading a book about by Sarah Wynne Williams about Facebook. It's an extraordinary book. Perhaps we'll talk about it another time. But one of the things she talks about there is how Mark Zuckerberg was prepared for his Senate hearings when he was being asked about China, and they spent hours and hours and hours preparing him so that he wouldn't have to lie. Although he then, according to her, went ahead and lied anyway about what they were doing with the Chinese Communist Party. But we might get asked a question in a church meeting, let's say, where actually we do have to preserve some confidentiality. So how do we do that and preserve integrity at the same time?
I think those are two slightly different things. There's confidentiality, which is, in a sense, who are the right people to know something. This is about speaking about people and situations in a way that you don't publicly speak. And I think that's not quite the same thing.
Agreed.
So that's about the way you view people. It's about revealing the attitudes of your heart. So confidentiality is about recognizing that not everybody is entitled to know everything, even if that everything is true. Although it's worth bearing in mind that with things like subject access requests and in various situations, what we think might be confidential isn't confidential. One thinks of the way that, for example, the Catholic Church has sometimes relied on confidentiality as a way of trying to keep things secret from confessions. That's not the case anymore. In some evangelical contexts, people have claimed, well, this was my personal speaking in a confession-like way, and how dare you have told anybody else that? John Smythe claimed that when he was speaking about his behaviour. So, I don't think confidentiality is quite the issue here. The issue here is this is revealing what you really think and what you're really like. And it's not even just opinion. It's revealing your character and your way of seeing the world.
And hypocrisy, Phil, is a very serious sin in the scriptures. So I think there are some, we tend to think of the serious sins as being outward moral failures. And of course, those are serious sins. But there are inward, if you like, a way of describing them, inward sins, pride, especially hypocrisy, that the Bible takes very, very seriously, because of course God sees our heart. So these things are not hidden from him. And I think just because we think no one knows, or it's internalized in some way, or it's secret from others, we think that for us as leaders it doesn't matter as much. But of course it does, because it goes to the heart of what we are before Christ and what we are in Christ, and therefore it goes to the heart actually of our leadership gifting and capability and capacity.
We always come back to Proverbs, don't we, when we talk about this? Wisdom, how the way we speak, all of that's there in the Proverbs. Sorry, John, I interrupted you.
I think from a Christian perspective, and the experience of the COVID inquiry is actually a slightly closer parallel, that there's something in which actually judicially a group of people are being held to account for what they've said in these private forums. I mean, this has come out accidentally with Trump, but the kind of judicial process is demanding that you account. Clearly, some people have deleted their messages. Some have said they've accidentally done it. They've changed their phone. So mysteriously, all sorts of messages that reveal what they were really thinking and what they were doing have actually vanished. But they were, in some measure, being held to account. And that's kind of like what it will be like with God. We will be held to account, and we cannot delete the messages. Nothing is hidden from God in that sense. So as we discuss this, I think it's also worth reflecting. It'd be very easy to say, oh, that reveals how terrible they are, and here are all these other people. Well, who knows what other people might be saying behind the scenes that is not known and not public. It causes us to, recognise our own sin as well, and to fight against that more fiercely.
Let's move on. There's been some protesting in Turkey this past week. So the man who's been Prime Minister and President variously of Turkey for the last 22 years, Erdogan, has had his political rival arrested. You described this in our notes before the meeting as a disaster for democracy in Turkey. But basically commentators saying that Erdogan, his critics say he's intolerant of dissent. And what we have, this has led to unrest in the country. But basically he looks untouchable.
Yes. Well, I did say it was about a very key moment for democracy, but actually democracy in Turkey has been very fragile for a long time. It's interesting. It's one of those countries a lot of people visit on holiday. They never really get beyond the compounds and the all-inclusive resorts on the south coast, on the Mediterranean coast. But it's a country that's kind of caught between Europe and Asia. It's a very interesting position that it holds. And I was reading this week that 7 countries that border on Turkey have different alphabets, not just different languages. There are 7 different alphabets on the borders of Turkey and neighbouring countries. So it's a very key country, and has been throughout world history, really. But for the last 20 years, you're right, Erdogan has had an extraordinary hold, an increasing hold. And I think, I mean, this is a slightly subjective view, but I think emboldened by Putin, he seems to be taking that sort of line. He seems to be suppressing opposition. He seems to be suppressing candidates in particular. So that the man who's been jailed is Ekrem İmamoğlu, who's the mayor of Istanbul, a fairly senior individual. And Istanbul is more secular overall than the whole country, even though the country has a secular constitution. It's essentially a Muslim place now. And İmamoğlu has been jailed and also had his degree removed from him.
And that's quite significant
well,
over there,
it is, because you can't
serve.
you can't stand as a candidate for president unless you have a university degree. There's all kinds of questions to ask about that anyway. But that's the case. And he's had his the degree conferring institution have removed his degree for some spurious reason, didn't work hard enough or something. So he can't actually stand as president. He's appealing to judges. But as we stand, 1,400 of his supporters have been arrested and put in prison. So it does look like a clampdown on democracy. And I think that is serious. I think that's serious not just for politics. I think it's serious for Christians. As a small minority of Christians in Turkey, it's a very hard place to be a Christian. Certainly some parts of the country are very hard. It's very hard to be a Christian. Many of us will know workers who are there as Christian workers. And given that it's right on our doorstep, it's really a place which is in desperate need of the gospel. So at all kinds of levels, I think this is troubling.
John?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And of course, Turkey is an area which is in a country in massive gospel need. It's also on the edge of kind of Islam and the Islamic world and Europe as well, and has occupied that position.
And it can't quite ever decide whether it's European or whether it's Asian.
Yeah.
Can it? Yeah.
So it's both a place of massive need, but potentially a place of great opportunity as well. And at one level, it has adopted a more moderate approach towards Islamism than many of the other countries. It's not quite got the Wahhabist, Saudi Arabian kind of extremist.
No, and that was built into
model.
its constitution.
And I think actually, as well as the particular issue of the moment, the whole issue in Turkey is between whether you become Islamist or whether you are secularist. So actually the division here is between Erdogan, who's basically set himself up as a kind of an Islamic leader, courted that constituency within Turkey. The opposition leader is actually coming out of the tradition of Ataturk, who was strictly secular. And I think that raises all sorts of questions of how do nations navigate religion in the contemporary world. So people have strongly held religious views, but should those influence and shape public policy? Ataturk himself was not exactly a liberal and tolerant. He kind of restricted Islamic practice. He banned the wearing of the fez. He tried to eliminate religion from public life. That's a model of secularism that tries to exclude religion. And I think lots of parts of the world, including our own country, are wrestling with this. How do you manage to have a cohesive state that has a population with a diversity of different religious views that are strongly and deeply sort of held? And those two models, you either adopt a religious perspective or you have a radical secularism that excludes religion. Neither of those actually seems to easily work. You need to have some sort of model in which you have a centre in which people can meet despite their religious perspectives, it seems to me, that in that sense has an element of secularity to it, but which is a tolerant recognition that people have religious beliefs that are to be expressed. So I think this has questions for how do we navigate being contemporary societies in which religion is increasingly important in the world, but actually in most countries there's also a diversity of religion. So you can't just simply adopt one particular religious view as dominant. So you see that in India, where in a sense there's the attempt to impose Hindu nationalism on the nation as a whole and make that national identity. Well, of course, there's a very significant both Muslim population and Christian population in India. So these are really massive questions that are being kind of worked out in the Turkish context.
Phil, Church History Spot. This is a current news podcast. As we're reflecting on Turkey, it's worth remembering, of course, the gospel spread through what is now Turkey very rapidly. Paul's travels went there. Just open up the back of your Bible and have a look at a map. And as we pray for Turkey, it's just worth reflecting on that. And it's quite a sober thought. You read the letters to the churches in Revelation, many of which are situated in modern day Turkey. And when you read about the removal of the lampstand, in Ephesus, for example. That's exactly what has happened. So there are some sobering things to reflect on just in terms of the Christian history and the way actually that the church thrived and then declined, perhaps because it was compromised, perhaps because it was overcome. And so, let's pray on for Christians, but let's learn the lessons from history as well.
As well as that, Turkey has also been a massively significant member of NATO in terms of the whole alliance, bulwark against Russia. It's had a huge armed forces. Americans have supplied massive amounts of military equipment to them. So Turkey has played a significant role in Western defence.
I wonder what they're saying about Turkey in their signal group.
Let's move on. Let's talk about our own Parliament and Kim Ledbetter's private member's bill on assisted dying, or let's call it what it is, assisted suicide. It was a day of prayer earlier this week, and after the day of prayer, things seemed to hit the buffers somewhat. There's going to be a delay in implementing this if it does come in. MPs increasingly seem to be concerned about the way this has been handled, the way it's been scrutinised. There seems to be a bit of discontent brewing there, which we're grateful for as Christians, because we believe in the sanctity of life. It's not defeated yet, but it certainly looks less likely than it was.
It's had a sticky few weeks, I think it's fair to say, and we rejoice in that. But you're right to say the battle is not won yet. So let's keep on praying, let's keep on writing and trying to influence politicians and people like that. So yes, I mean the big news really in the committee is they removed the judge overseeing it and replaced it with a panel. And again, every time they do something like that, it chips away a bit of support amongst MPs. And then the latest thing is that it's been delayed really for a few years. 2029 is it?
Yeah, that's what they're saying. Which they're also pointing out as an election year, which then
And so all of those things are things to rejoice in, but none of them are. None of them are guarantees, of course, it will fail. It's just worth setting it in the wider context of the British Isles and the United Kingdom. It's just worth reflecting on the fact that the Isle of Man, on the very same day we were praying, the Parliament in the Isle of Man voted finally to approve an assisted dying bill, which is a tragedy for people who live on the Isle of Man, I think. And also last May, the state's parliament in Jersey voted to approve a bill. They're working through the details. They've got to have a final vote yet, but it looks like it's going to go through. And so actually we're slightly behind both Jersey and the Isle of Man. And obviously people might be listening from those places. So we are talking about mainland UK at the moment, but we need to recognise that other places are further ahead as well. Sad.
I think it's good news that it's been delayed. It's being scrutinised. Right. I mean, I think people are more and more aware of some of the dangers that are involved in this. There are interesting things going on. So Esther Ranson has been a massive supporter of this assisted dying bill, but actually she's receiving treatment for lung cancer and is basically enjoying much more life than was anticipated. And people are saying, well, that's exactly the problem, that medical advance might enable you to overcome that. And comments from people who've been in favour of assisted dying that just are shocking. I came across one in the paper yesterday of a doctor who has supported it, who basically said if a few grannies get bullied into assisted suicide,
that's an extraordinary
a price worth paying for all the people who will be able to die a dignified death. So as that comes out, I think that reveals the
General Medical
danger.
Council have also been challenged. Have you seen that, John?
No.
So the General Medical Council changed their position a few years ago to say they were neutral on assisted dying, but there's been a groundswell rebellion really from members saying actually that's not what we think, and they actually had a vote in the General Medical Council, and it was only 30%. It was 30% who were in favour of assisted dying, and many more who were neutral or against it. And so they're saying that actually doesn't represent our position. So there are these little bits of pushback, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, even this doctor recognised it's largely the Christians who are leading the campaign against it, which again has been noticed. Having said that, we've said this before, but I think it needs to be reiterated. It's not just about assisted dying. There is an issue here of how we care for people with terminal illness, people in need.
Invest in palliative care.
Invest in palliative care. All the government's changes in, for example, national insurance are massively affecting hospices, which are often charitably funded. We see the massive
removal of benefits.
That
last week,
mental health crisis we've seen around the world. That in countries where assisted dying has been introduced, people begin to start seeking assisted dying because of mental health issues, and they think that their life is not worth living. So there's also the other positive side of it, that as a society we need to be investing in the very things that enable people to be properly cared for, looked after, in order that they don't want to go through the process of assisted dying. So at one level, it's absolutely right to fight on the moral issue. I think as Christians, there's the other side of the coin, that we actually need to be concerned about the way society cares for people so that they don't actually want to cross that moral line. And of course, historically, the church has had this massive role to play in looking after people and caring for people. And you can't, in a sense, have the positive situation without being willing to invest the resources sort of in it. So I don't think we should see this as just a one-sided issue. It's absolutely right to oppose, but at the same time, surely we need to put in place the positive things.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we pray on for that, and we'll put something in the show notes of the campaigning organisations that can give you help and advice on how to engage with your MP on this issue.
Keep it on your prayer meeting agenda,
absolutely.
Things like that. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. So CARE, Christian Institute, Christian Concern, those kind of groups. We'll put some links in the show notes. Let's talk for the last few minutes about Wigmore Hall.
It's about time we got a bit more highbrow.
I just checked my notes. I've just got that right. It is Wigmore Hall.
Yeah, it is Wigmore Hall.
Excellent.
Yeah.
This is a classical music venue which has always been part of the Arts Council and relied on
arts. It's a music venue. It's not just classical music.
I beg your pardon.
It's mostly classical music.
You can tell where this story came from, and it wasn't from this chair. But they've left the Arts Council.
You wanted to do a football story. I wanted to raise the whole tone.
This is where we are. But they've left the Arts Council and Arts Council funding and gone independent.
So the Arts Council provide significant funding for most of our arts venues around the country of all kinds, not just classical music venues, but all kinds of venues. Their funding has been cut significantly over the last few years. They in turn have cut funding to other organisations, which has meant local theatres have had to close, local music venues have had to close, or have had to completely reimagine, how they're structured. Wigmore Hall is one of the premier arts venues in the country. It's based in London, and just had a refurbishment a few years ago. It's a nice place. I quite like going there, listen to various things, have lunchtime concerts and all sorts. But interestingly, they're a bit fed up with the Arts Council because they say with the funding comes lots of strings. You have to do this, you have to do that. We won't give you the money unless you go and do this. And the Wigmore Hall governors have basically said their agenda is not always our agenda. Why should we do what they say? It actually hamstrings us. It makes it very difficult for us to operate as we'd like to operate. So we're going to go independent. So Wigmore Hall
reminds me of
it's applied to join the FIEC. Yeah. Or it would have done if it was a church and it was evangelical. They've basically gone independent from the Arts Council. It's a brave thing to do. And if you were cynical in the arts world, you would say it was an easy thing for them to do because they are in a position to raise money that perhaps smaller venues can't. So it's quite interesting in this context. An organisation that has a reputation, that is large, that has a large customer base, it's easier for them to say, we don't want you anymore. They've raised about £10 million, which will keep them going for 5 years. And so they've basically left the Arts Council, said we're going to do it our own way. And there's been a general cheer from the arts world, alongside a little bit of a groan from people who say we just can't afford to do that. We don't have the customer base, we don't have the support, we don't have the income to be able to do that. So I think it's a very interesting reflection on independency. It seems to me that Wigmore Hall being in charge of their own destiny, deciding who they want to have perform, deciding what concerts they want to put on. It seems to me that's a really good thing. I'm really in favour of that. The fact they've been able to raise their money, that's great news. But also just a reality that independency is very difficult for some who are dependent on other income streams. It's not always as easy to say, of course you're going to be independent. There are other factors at play in the background that actually make it sometimes a hard choice for people, even though I think in this case it's the right choice.
I'm not sure we've ever talked about our ecclesiology on In the News before, John, but here's the opportunity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And at one level, there is a parallel clearly here with independent church ecclesiology. In FIEC, we are the Fellowship of Independent Evangelical Churches. We believe that churches should be self-governing and autonomous. We actually believe that's the biblical picture. And in one sense, the origins of independency, which came early in the Reformation in the 16th century, were precisely because Christians didn't want to be controlled by other bodies as to how they worshipped God, the theology that they held. So
even music,
even music. So when the kind of the Anglican Church or the settlement was trying to force every church to basically conform to what the Anglican Church required, people said, no, we want the freedom to be basically Bible-believing and Bible-practicing churches. And that was the origin.
One of our oldest churches came out of the Anglican Church in 1662, didn't it?
So it was a desire to want to have that freedom to be faithful. And that's the origins of independency. I think it's worth recognising that that is a positive, there are also the dangers that might go along with that. So as soon as you're independent, you can essentially do what you want. So presumably the Wigmore Hall could decide to... Well, yeah, they could, exactly. They could decide to do something that's offensive, kind of form of music, or do something completely different, lose their kind of authenticity in that sense. That is the danger, that churches that become independent don't have any external body holding them to account. At that point, their leadership and their trustees become hugely significant, and that's the role of church leaders in an independent church. It is the trustees, the leaders, who are the guardians of faithfulness, and they need to exercise that responsibility within the life of the local church. And then, as you say, there's that danger that those that are bigger and that have resources can thrive, whereas others are not able to. But independents from a very early stage recognised the importance of supporting and encouraging one another.
Interdependence.
Forming associations.
They then began to bring together things that were joint funds for, say, the support of ministers, the training of ministers. So independency is not incompatible with cooperation and sharing and mutual support. It's not about isolation and refusal to work with others. And actually, at its best, that is what independency has done. And in many ways, FIEC came into existence not to bring about independency, but to provide that element of mutual cooperation, so that independency is not the same as isolation, to hold each other to account for core convictions that we believe in, and then to be able to work together for mutual support of the gospel. So a lot of our work is about helping larger churches to support smaller churches, for cooperative church planting, for working together in training with other organisations that provide training resources. So we exist in a sense to enable independent churches to work together effectively, so that some of those problems are avoided. But we don't control, because those churches voluntarily belong to us. And as we were originally described as being a society of mutual helpfulness, that's what we want to be across our churches.
So maybe Wigmore Hall will set up the Fellowship of Independent Music Halls.
Well, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, if they suddenly supported a concert venue in Middlesbrough, let's say, that didn't have that base and shared resources and expertise, that would be a great thing to do.
We shall wait and see. Well, as time has gone, thanks so much for talking about some of the news stories that have been making the headlines this past couple of weeks. Do rate, leave reviews so others can find it.
And enjoy your Mozart concert this week.
Thank you very much. Yes, there we are. So, yes, it's been good to be in touch with you. Do listen again soon, and we'll see you again soon. God bless.